The artificial sunlight of orbital station Epsilon 9 never quite matched Earth's warm glow, but after 3 years, Marcus Reed had almost gotten used to it. Almost. He adjusted his camera strap, the vintage Nikon, an actual physical camera in this age of neural imaging, hanging heavy around his neck like an anchor to a past he couldn't quite let go of. "Reed! Are you even listening?" The sharp voice of his editor, Director Patel, cut through his daydreaming. "This assignment isn't just another fluff piece for the station newsletter. The Xylorian delegation includes actual royalty, their first diplomatic mission beyond their star system in a century." Marcus nodded, trying to look appropriately impressed. "Got it. Big aliens, big story. This isn't a joke." Patel's eyes narrowed. "The Xylorians control access to the largest known deposits of quantum crystals in the explored galaxy. One wrong move, and Epsilon 9 could lose its chance at a trade agreement that would make us all very wealthy." That got Marcus's attention. His cramped living pod and the constant struggle to pay for data transmissions back to his family on Earth were constant reminders of just how far he'd fallen. Once a celebrated photojournalist covering Earth's environmental renaissance, now reduced to taking pictures of hydroponics achievements and maintenance worker retirements. "I won't mess it up," Marcus promised, meaning it this time. The diplomatic reception area of Epsilon 9 had been transformed. The typically utilitarian space now gleamed with polished surfaces and holographic decorations mimicking what station intelligence suggested would please Xylorian aesthetic sensibilities, lots of crystalline structures and shifting geometric patterns that made Marcus slightly dizzy. Station Administrator Yoshida approached, her formal uniform impeccably pressed. "Mr. Reed, I expect nothing but the highest professionalism tonight. The Xylorians are extremely traditional. Their cultural protocols are complex. I've studied the briefing materials," Marcus lied. The 300-page cultural guide had remained untouched in his data queue. Yoshida looked unconvinced. "Just remember, no direct eye contact with royalty, no recording devices within 3 meters of any Xylorian, and absolutely no laughter during the formal introductions. They consider it deeply disrespectful." "No laughing, got it." That, at least, seemed easy enough. Marcus hadn't found much to laugh about lately anyway. The station's alert system chimed softly, and Yoshida straightened. "They're docking. Places, everyone." The arrival of the Xylorian delegation was an exercise in precision and pageantry. First came the guards, tall, humanoid figures with iridescent scales instead of skin and ceremonial weapons that Marcus suspected were far from ceremonial in function. Their movements were synchronized to an eerie degree, as if they shared a hive mind. Then came various officials and advisors, each announced with titles that seemed to stretch on forever. Marcus dutifully captured images, staying at the prescribed distance, the soft click of his physical camera drawing curious glances from the aliens. His Supreme Luminance, Keeper of the Seven Moons, Protector of the Crystal Throne, Master of the Quantum Tides, King Valerian the Magnificent, announced a Xylorian herald. King Valerian entered, and Marcus nearly dropped his camera. The Xylorian monarch stood over 7 feet tall, his scaled skin shifting colors like oil on water. A crown that appeared to be made of living crystal adorned his crested head, pulsing with inner light that matched his movements. Her serene radiance, daughter of the crystal throne, mistress of the third moon, guardian of the ancient codes, Princess Lyra the Incandescent. The princess entered with equal ceremony but surprising grace. Unlike her father's imposing presence, Princess Lyra moved with fluid elegance. Her scales shimmered predominantly blue with hints of violet, and the crystal adornments she wore were more delicate than her father's ostentatious display. There was something almost human in her expression, a subtle hint of, was that boredom? As the herald continued listing Princess Lyra's titles, including Harmony Bringer to the Dissonant Spheres and Eternal Light of the Quantum Dawn, Marcus felt a dangerous tickle in his throat. The combination of nervousness, the absurdity of the endless titles, and the princess's barely concealed eye roll at her own introduction proved too much. He tried to suppress it. He really did. But the laugh escaped before he could stop it, a short, strangled sound that in any normal circumstance might have gone unnoticed. But in the ceremonial silence of the Xylorian royal introduction, it echoed like a thunderclap. Everything stopped. The herald froze mid-title. The station officials stood paralyzed in horror. And every Xylorian head turned toward Marcus with perfect, terrifying synchronization. King Valorian's scales darkened to a deep crimson. "Who," he said, his voice resonating at a frequency that made Marcus's fillings vibrate, "dares dishonor the royal introduction with the sound of mockery?" Administrator Yoshida looked like she might faint. Director Patel was already backing away, creating distance between himself and Marcus. I apologize," Marcus stammered, lowering his camera. It was a nervous reaction, not mockery. "I meant no disrespect." The king's eyes, all four of them, narrowed. "Approach, human." Marcus glanced at Yoshida, who gave a tiny, resigned nod. On wooden legs, he walked forward until he stood before the towering monarch. "Your name?" "Marcus Reed, your, Supreme Luminance." Princess Lyra stepped forward, touching her father's arm lightly. "Father, the human clearly doesn't understand our ways." "Perhaps." "Silence, daughter," the king commanded, though without harshness. "The codes of Xylor are clear on this matter. One who mocks royalty must face the consequences." Marcus swallowed hard. "Consequences?" "By the ancient laws that have governed our people since we first harnessed the power of the quantum crystals," King Valerian intoned formally, "one who publicly insults a member of the royal family must either join with the insulted through matrimonial bond, or face permanent exile from all worlds where Xylorian influence extends." It took several seconds for Marcus to process this. "Wait, marry or exile? Those are my only options." "Father." Princess Lyra protested, her scales flashing indignantly. "This is absurd. I cannot marry this photographer." King Valorian's expression remained impassive. "The law is the law, daughter. It has preserved our dignity for 10,000 years. But," Marcus began. "You have until the end of our diplomatic mission, 3 Earth days, to decide," the king declared. "Until then, you will be confined to appropriate quarters to reflect upon your choices." 2 Xylorian guards moved to flank Marcus. Administrator Yoshida looked as though she might actually weep as she whispered, "I told you not to laugh." As Marcus was escorted away, he caught Princess Lyra's gaze. For just a moment, her frustration seemed to mirror his own. She looked from him to her father, then back again, and in that brief exchange, Marcus sensed something unexpected, not just anger or royal indignation, but a spark of calculated interest. The doors to the diplomatic reception slid closed behind him, and Marcus heard the festivities reluctantly resume. 3 days to decide between marrying an alien princess or being permanently blacklisted from every world with Xylorian trade connections, which, given their monopoly on quantum crystals, meant virtually everywhere humanity had expanded to. "Some diplomatic function, huh?" he remarked to his stone-faced guards. Neither responded, but Marcus could have sworn one's scales flickered briefly with what might have been amusement. His appropriate quarters turned out to be a luxurious suite normally reserved for visiting dignitaries, though the locked door and guard outside made it clear this was still a form of detention. Marcus paced the room, his mind racing through impossible scenarios. Marriage to an alien princess he'd just met. Permanent exile from human space. Both options seemed equally absurd. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open to reveal Director Patel, looking as though he'd aged a decade in the past hour. "Reed, do you have any idea what you've done?" Patel hissed. "You've jeopardized not just the trade agreement but potentially relations with the entire Xylorian Empire." "I laughed," Marcus said flatly. "I didn't start an interstellar war. With the Xylorians, it might amount to the same thing." Patel ran a hand through his thinning hair. Administrator Yoshida is in emergency talks with Earth Command now. But the Xylorians are adamant, their laws are absolute. Marcus sank onto a couch. So what do I do? I don't know, Patel admitted, suddenly looking more sympathetic than angry. But you've got 3 days to figure it out. And Reed? Whatever you decide, make it count. After Patel left, Marcus stood at the viewport, staring out at the distant stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, where his family still waited for him to make something of himself. And somewhere much closer was an alien princess who might soon be his wife, or the architect of his permanent exile. Either way, his life as he knew it was over. Sleep eluded Marcus despite the luxurious accommodations of his gilded cell. The room's ambient lighting had dimmed to simulate night, but his mind refused to quiet. Marriage to an alien princess or permanent exile from human space, both options seemed equally impossible. A soft chime broke the silence, startling him. The door slid open without warning, revealing Princess Lyra herself. Her scales had shifted to deeper blues in the low light, and she discarded the formal regalia from earlier, now wearing what appeared to be the Xylorian equivalent of casual attire, still elegant, but less ostentatious. Princess, Marcus sat up quickly. I didn't expect. Keep your voice down, she instructed, glancing behind her before stepping fully into the room. The door closed automatically. The guards believe I'm here to assess your suitability as a potential mate. In reality, I wanted to speak with you privately. Marcus noticed she seemed different, more direct, less formal. Her royal mannerisms had fallen away. About our impending nuptials, he asked with a wry smile. This is no laughing matter, she replied, though her scales rippled with a pattern that Marcus was beginning to recognize as the Xylorian equivalent of ironic amusement. Though I suppose that's precisely what got us into this situation. I really am sorry about that, Marcus offered. Your titles were just so ridiculous, she suggested. Pompous? Absurdly elaborate? Marcus blinked in surprise. I was going to say, extensive, but yes. Princess Lyra sank gracefully onto a chair opposite him. 10,000 years of tradition creates a lot of unnecessary verbal baggage. Lyra would have sufficed. You're not what I expected, Marcus admitted. And what did you expect? A haughty alien princess obsessed with protocol and tradition? Something like that. Lyra's scales shifted to a contemplative purple. I may have been born to the crystal throne, but that doesn't mean I blindly embrace every ancient custom. Some traditions outlive their usefulness. Like forcing people to marry because of a laugh. Precisely. She leaned forward. Marcus Reed, I have no more desire to marry you than you do me. No offense intended. None taken, he assured her. So how do we get out of this? My father is many things, but flexible regarding our laws is not one of them. However, her eyes gleamed with strategic calculation, laws can be circumvented when greater priorities emerge. What greater priority could possibly? A distant explosion rocked the station, sending them both lurching forward. Emergency sirens blared as the lighting switched to red alert status. What was that? Marcus demanded, moving toward the viewport. Princess Lyra was already on her feet, scales rapidly shifting to alert patterns of orange and yellow. I feared this might happen. Not every Xylorian embraces my father's diplomatic mission. You're saying that was a Xylorian attack? On your own delegation? The Crystal Throne has enemies, she explained tersely, moving to the door panel and entering an override code. Traditionalists who believe we should remain isolated. They would sabotage any alliance with other species. The door slid open. Outside, chaos reigned as station personnel rushed past, emergency protocols in full effect. We need to find my father, Lyra said. He'll be the primary target. Marcus hesitated only a moment before grabbing his camera. Lead the way. They navigated the station's corridors against the flow of evacuating personnel. Another explosion, closer this time, sent vibrations through the floor plating. Smoke began to fill certain sections, and automated containment barriers were dropping into place. The diplomatic quarters are this way, Marcus directed, pulling Lyra down a maintenance corridor he knew from his years of station photography. Shortcut. As they emerged near the diplomatic wing, they encountered their first signs of violence. Two Xylorian royal guards lay motionless, their scales dulled to gray in death. Nearby, several station security officers were also down. Lyra knelt briefly beside her fallen countrymen, touching their foreheads in what appeared to be a gesture of respect. House Trevax, she said grimly, indicating markings on the weapons that had killed them. The most radical of the isolationist factions. How many are we dealing with? Marcus asked, suddenly very aware he had no weapon beyond his camera. If it's a standard strike team, perhaps 6 warriors, Lyra replied. But they're elite assassins, trained from hatching for this purpose. Wonderful, Marcus muttered. And what's our plan exactly? Warn my father, evacuate our delegation, and escape with minimal casualties. Simple enough, Marcus said sarcastically, but followed as she moved cautiously forward. The main diplomatic suite had been fortified. Overturned furniture created makeshift barricades, and the remaining Xylorian guards had taken defensive positions. King Valerian himself stood in the center, a weapon that looked ceremonial but clearly wasn't clutched in his scaled hands. Lyra, he exclaimed as they entered. Where have you been? Reconnaissance, she answered smoothly. The attackers are House Trevax. I count at least 4 fallen warriors, but there will be others. The king's gaze fell on Marcus. And why is the human with you? He knows the station, Lyra replied before Marcus could speak. He can help us evacuate safely. King Valerian didn't look convinced, but the situation left little room for argument. The attackers have disabled the primary evacuation routes and communications. Our ship is sealed in the docking bay. Marcus's mind raced, calling up his mental map of Epsilon 9. There's a maintenance access that leads directly to the docking area. It's not on standard schematics. Can you lead us there? The king demanded. Yes, but we'll need to move quickly and quietly. And I'll need to make a stop at security first. For what purpose? Marcus held up his camera. This isn't just a camera. It's modified to interface with station systems. I can access security protocols, maybe restore communications or at least see where the attackers are. The king and princess exchanged looks that carried an entire conversation in shifting scale patterns. Finally, Valerian nodded. Very well. But if you betray us? I know. Permanent exile from the galaxy. Marcus managed a tight smile. Let's go. The journey through the maintenance corridors was tense but uneventful until they reached the security hub. The doors had been forced open, and inside they found Administrator Yoshida bleeding but alive. Reed, she gasped as Marcus helped her to a chair. What are you doing with? Her eyes widened as she recognized the Royal Xylorians. Long story, Marcus said. What happened here? Attackers bypassed our security, targeting the Xylorian delegation. She managed before slumping back, clearly struggling to stay conscious. She needs medical attention, Marcus said. Our priority must be escape, King Valerian insisted. The human cannot travel with us. We can't just leave her, Marcus protested. Lyra stepped forward. Father, remember why we came on this mission. To prove Xylorians can adapt, can form alliances beyond our own kind. What message does it send if we abandon the injured? The king's scales darkened with displeasure, but he nodded. Very well. But we must move quickly. Marcus connected his camera to the security console, fingers flying over the interface. I can access the surveillance system. Let's see where our attackers are. The screens flickered to life, showing various sections of the station. 3 Xylorians in distinctive armor were methodically making their way toward the docking bay. "They're cutting us off," Lyra observed. "Maybe not," Marcus pointed to another screen showing an alternative route. "Maintenance shaft 7B connects to the secondary docking collar. If we can reach your ship from there, it would bypass the attackers entirely," the king finished, looking at Marcus with newfound respect. "I'll need to transfer Administrator Yoshida to the medical bay first," Marcus insisted. "It's on our way." With a plan in place, they moved swiftly. After delivering Yoshida to the emergency medical staff, they navigated the narrow maintenance passages toward the secondary docking area. Just as they approached the final junction, the station rocked with another explosion. "They're trying to disable the docking mechanisms," Lyra said as they steadied themselves. "We're almost there," Marcus encouraged, leading them through the final stretch. The secondary docking collar was mercifully clear of attackers, the Xylorian royal vessel visible through the airlock window. As they approached, however, Marcus noticed something attached to the airlock controls, an explosive device with a countdown timer. "Stop," he called out, throwing up a hand to halt the group. "There's a bomb." King Valorian's scales paled. "Can you disarm it?" Marcus studied the device, recognizing the basic design from his years covering conflict zones on Earth. "I think so, but it's risky." "Allow me," Lyra stepped forward, her delicate fingers moving with surprising expertise over the device. House Trevax uses predictable bombing techniques. With just seconds remaining, she disconnected a crucial component, and the timer froze. "Impressive," Marcus remarked. "One doesn't grow up in royal politics without learning a few survival skills," she replied with a hint of a smile. With the bomb disabled, they boarded the royal vessel. The Xylorian crew, relieved to see their monarch alive, immediately prepared for emergency departure. As the airlock sealed behind them, Marcus realized his predicament. He was now leaving with the very aliens who had given him an impossible choice just hours earlier. King Valerian approached as the ship disengaged from the station. "Human," he began formally, "your actions today have demonstrated courage and honor." "Just doing what anyone would do," Marcus demurred. "Not anyone," the king contradicted. "You risked your life for hours when you could have used the chaos to escape your sentence." Princess Lyra joined them. "Father, perhaps this changes things." The king's scales shifted thoughtfully. "Indeed. Marcus read, by the ancient laws of Xylar, one who saves royal blood is granted a royal boon. This supersedes even the laws of insult." "A boon?" Marcus asked cautiously. "A wish, a request, a pardon," Lyra explained. "Within reason. So I don't have to marry the princess or face exile." Marcus clarified. "You are freed from that obligation," the king confirmed. "Instead, you may request a different favor." Marcus thought for a moment, then smiled. "How about exclusive rights to photograph and document Xylorian culture for the human media? A cultural exchange that could benefit both our peoples." King Valorian's scales rippled with surprise. "You wish to continue association with us? Even after all this?" "Let's just say my perspective has changed," Marcus glanced at Lyra, who was watching him with interest. "I think our peoples have more to learn from each other than either of us realized." "Very well," the king declared. "It shall be arranged." As the royal ship accelerated away from Epsilon 9, Marcus gazed out at the stars stretching before them. A universe of possibilities had just opened up, not because he'd avoided laughing at a princess, but because he had. "So," Lyra joined him at the viewport, "it seems you've gone from prisoner to royal documentarian in less than a day." "Life has a funny way of working out," Marcus replied. "Indeed," she agreed, her scales shimmering with genuine amusement. "Though next time, perhaps wait until after the formal introductions to laugh." "No promises," Marcus said with a smile, and raised his camera to capture the moment when his new life truly began. 3 months into his role as the official human documentarian to the Xylorian royal court, Marcus Reed still found himself marveling at the twisted spires and crystalline architecture of the capital city. Xyloria Prime, with its 3 moons perpetually visible in the lavender sky, defied Earth architectural principles in ways that continually challenged his photographer's eye. "You're doing it again," Princess Lyra observed, her scales shifting to an amused turquoise as she joined him on the observation deck of the royal palace. "Doing what?" Marcus asked, lowering his camera. "Staring at everything like it's your first day here," she replied. "Most humans would have become accustomed to the views by now." Marcus shook his head. "A good photographer never becomes accustomed to beauty. The moment you stop seeing the wonder in something is the moment you should change professions." Lyra's scales rippled in what Marcus had learned was the Xylorian equivalent of a thoughtful smile. In the months since the attack on Epsilon 9, they had developed an unusual friendship, neither fully formal nor entirely casual, existing in a diplomatic gray area that seemed to suit them both. "The Council of Elders was impressed with your latest transmission to Earth," Lyra said, changing the subject. "Even the traditionalists admitted your images portrayed our culture with dignity." "High praise from people who wanted me exiled 3 months ago," Marcus quipped, adjusting his camera settings to capture the way the setting sun refracted through the city's crystal towers. "They're coming around." Slowly. Lyra moved closer, her royal robes whispering across the polished floor. "Though I should warn you, there's been discussion about your access to certain ceremonies." Marcus lowered his camera again. "Let me guess, House Trivac's objections." "Not just them. Even some of my father's allies believe you've been given too much freedom too quickly." The familiar frustration rose in Marcus's chest. For every step forward in documenting Xylorian culture, there seemed to be 2 steps back. The progressive faction, led by King Valerian, welcomed the cultural exchange, while traditionalists viewed his very presence as contamination of their sacred traditions. "Your father promised unrestricted access as my boon," Marcus reminded her. "And he has honored that as much as politically possible," Lyra countered, her scales darkening slightly. "But even a king must consider the will of his people." Before Marcus could respond, a royal messenger approached, bowing deeply before Princess Lyra. "Your Radiance, His Supreme Luminance requests your immediate presence in the Grand Council chamber." "The human is also summoned." Lyra's scales flashed with surprise. "Did my father say why?" "A matter of great importance has arisen." "That is all I was told, Your Radiance." After the messenger departed, Marcus and Lyra exchanged concerned glances. "The Grand Council chamber is only used for matters of state," Lyra explained as they hurried through the palace corridors. "Whatever this is, it's significant." The Grand Council chamber lived up to its name, a vast circular room with a domed ceiling that appeared to be open to space itself, though Marcus knew it was an advanced holographic projection. Concentric rings of crystalline seats surrounded a central platform where King Valerian stood, his scales a formal shade of deep purple that Marcus had come to associate with royal pronouncements. Around the king stood the 12 members of the High Council, representatives from each of the major Xylorian houses. Marcus noted with unease that several members of House Trivax were present, their scales set in patterns of rigid disapproval. "Daughter, Human Reed," the king acknowledged as they entered. "Approach." As they took their places on the platform, Marcus felt the weight of dozens of alien gazes upon him. Whatever was happening, he was clearly at the center of it. 3 lunar cycles ago, King Valerian began without preamble, "We granted the human known as Marcus Reed unprecedented access to our culture as reward for his service during the Trivax insurrection." Murmurs rippled through the assembly at the mention of the attack. "In that time," the king continued, "his images and accounts have been transmitted to Earth and distributed throughout human space. Today, we have received a formal communication from the Earth Diplomatic Corps in response." Marcus straightened. This was news to him. He'd had no contact with Earth officials since leaving Epsilon 9. A holographic projection appeared in the center of the chamber, the official seal of the Earth Diplomatic Corps followed by the face of an older woman Marcus recognized as Admiral Helena Voss, one of Earth's most respected diplomats. Greetings to His Supreme Luminance, King Valerian the Magnificent, and to the noble houses of Xyler. The recording began formally. The governments of Earth have reviewed the cultural materials provided by Marcus Reed with great interest. We formally request the establishment of a permanent diplomatic mission to Xyloria Prime, with the goal of negotiating a comprehensive treaty of alliance and trade between our peoples. The chamber erupted into chaos, some councillors rising in obvious approval, others in equally obvious objection. King Valerian raised a hand for silence, which gradually fell. "There is more," he said, and the recording continued. Furthermore, Admiral Voss continued, "We propose that Marcus Reed, who has served as an unofficial ambassador between our worlds, be formally recognized as Earth's diplomatic liaison during the transition period. A full delegation will depart Earth space within 1 standard month, pending your approval." As the recording ended, Marcus stood frozen in shock. From accidental royal insulter to official Earth representative in just 3 months, surely some cosmic entity was having a laugh at his expense. "This is unprecedented," declared Councillor Marivax, her scales flashing with excitement. "Direct diplomatic relations with humans could revolutionize our economy, our sciences. It could destroy our way of life," countered Councillor Trivax, the patriarch of the isolationist house. "Our traditions have preserved us for 10,000 years. This human has been here mere months and already Earth seeks to establish a permanent presence." "I was unaware of this communication," Marcus said carefully, addressing King Valerian directly. "I've made no requests for diplomatic status." "We understand this," the king replied. "Yet your work has clearly impressed your leaders enough for them to propose this significant step." Lyra stepped forward. "Father, this is an opportunity. The alliance you've sought for years is now within reach." "An alliance we do not need," Councillor Trivax insisted. "The human should be sent back immediately, before more damage is done." King Valorian's scales shifted to a contemplative pattern. "The Council will deliberate on Earth's proposal. Until a decision is reached, Marcus Reed will continue his documentation work, but under increased security. House Marivax will provide guards to ensure both his safety and appropriate access." Marcus recognized the diplomatic compromise, neither rejection nor immediate acceptance, with the added security serving as both protection and supervision. "There is one more matter," the king added. "Earth has requested a direct response from Marcus Reed himself, confirming his willingness to serve in this diplomatic capacity." All eyes turned to Marcus, who suddenly felt the weight of 2 civilizations on his shoulders. He glanced at Lyra, whose scales held a pattern he'd never seen before, something complex and unreadable. "I would be honored to serve as liaison," he said carefully, "provided both governments believe it would be beneficial. My goal has always been to promote understanding between our peoples." "Well spoken," King Valerian acknowledged. "The council is adjourned for deliberation. We will reconvene at the rising of the 3rd moon." As the councillors filed out, Marcus and Lyra were escorted to a side chamber where they could speak privately. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" Marcus asked once they were alone. "I didn't know," Lyra replied, her scales pulsing with sincerity. "Though I'm not entirely surprised. Your transmissions to Earth have been compelling." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd never quite overcome. "I'm a photographer, not a diplomat." "Yet you've managed to capture the essence of our world better than any formal ambassador could have," Lyra pointed out. "Perhaps that's exactly what both our peoples needed." "Your father doesn't seem convinced." "My father must balance many interests. The traditionalists hold significant power, especially after the Trivax attack was so nearly successful." Lyra moved to the window, gazing out at the capital city as twilight descended. "But he wants this alliance, Marcus. He has for many years." Marcus joined her at the window. "And what do you want, Lyra?" Her scales shifted through several colors before settling into a deep, iridescent blue that he'd come to associate with her most honest moments. I want progress for my people. I want to lead them toward a future where we don't hide behind traditions simply because they're ancient. She turned to face him directly. And I believe connection with Earth, with humans, is part of that future. There was something in her tone that suggested she might be speaking about more than just diplomatic relations, but before Marcus could respond, a chime announced the arrival of his new security detail, 4 Xylorian guards from House Merrivax. We are assigned to the human diplomat, announced the lead guard, her scales formal but not unfriendly. He is in your care, Lyra acknowledged, slipping effortlessly back into her royal persona. Ensure he has appropriate access to continue his work. As Marcus was escorted back to his quarters, his mind raced with possibilities. 3 months ago, his greatest aspiration had been to escape the drudgery of station life and return to Earth photography. Now he stood at the crossroads of interstellar diplomacy, with the futures of 2 worlds potentially shaped by his actions. And somewhere in the midst of it all was Princess Lyra, enigmatic, complex, and increasingly central to his thoughts in ways that extended well beyond politics. His camera felt heavy around his neck, a physical reminder of how he'd always processed the world, one carefully framed image at a time. But now the picture was too large, too complex to capture in a single shot. He would need to learn a new way of seeing.